Welcome in. It is TYT, The Conversation. I'm your host, Adrienne Lawrence. And right now I have joining me, Manisha Krishnan. She's a senior editor at Vice News, reporting on subjects like racism, drug policy, sexual violence against women, and guns. Welcome in, Manisha.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so right now, hey, we're just coming off of the unfortunate September 6th loss of actor Michael K. Williams, who's very fondly known from the show The Wire. And he had died, as the coroner found out, to an accidental opioid overdose. And I know that you believe that opioids right now are currently more dangerous than ever. Why is that?
Yeah, so I just want to be really clear what I mean by that. And I'm talking about the street drug supply, so street opioids. I'm not talking about prescription pills. But basically, what's happening in markets around North America is we are seeing a flood of fentanyl. And so people who traditionally would use heroin are now using fentanyl. And sometimes there is no heroin to be found. And fentanyl is much, much more potent than heroin. It's up to 100 times more potent than morphine, 50 times more powerful than heroin. And that means it's just much easier to overdose.
Yikes, that's entirely unfortunate, especially given how we've seen opioids, things like fentanyl really circulate among the market. And what do you think that a lot of people are missing right now when they are focusing on the opioid debate and crisis?
I think that there's a lot of interesting dynamics happening that are very alarming. I think, one of the problems that we're seeing that's really scary right now is there's a lot of fentanyl analogs hitting the market. And what that means is because fentanyl is a synthetic, it's a man-made drug, what these drug manufacturers can do essentially is they can keep tweaking them. They can keep changing the chemical structure of them to try to evade the Controlled Substances Act, to basically try to find legal loopholes. And so you're seeing drugs that are even stronger than fentanyl hitting the market now. In fact, in Michael K. Williams' case, he did have a fentanyl analog found in his body that's much more powerful than even fentanyl. So it's kind of this brave or terrifying new world, I should say. It's really, really different than the days of when people were just simply using heroin.
Yikes. And we're just coming off of or in the midst of the opioid crisis right now. And so the thought that there is something even stronger out there on the streets, it's very disconcerting. And I know the Drug Enforcement Agency Administration, the DEA, released a public safety alert earlier this week about an influx of fake prescription pills containing meth and fentanyl. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what they're saying is that they've had kind of, the largest seizure ever of these counterfeit pills. And they're pills that are being sold as meth. They're pills that are being sold as other drugs, sometimes even like Adderall and stuff like that, but they actually contain fentanyl. And what we're seeing more of as well is other drugs such as cocaine, sometimes MDMA and drugs like that that also contain fentanyl. And if you're not an opioid user, if you're just, let's say, a recreational cocaine user and you have a little bit of fentanyl that's cut into your drugs, that can mean that you overdose and die.
Wow. And do you think that there's a lot of conversation about this in the media? Because this is definitely something I have not necessarily been aware of.
I don't know. I think, I'm probably in a bubble because I am a drug policy reporter. So I have been sort of looking at this issue for years at this point. I think what frustrates me is that we're still very much on a basic kind of war on drugs level of conversation about how to police our way out of these problems. If you look at drug policy in America, it's actually pretty behind. There's no sort of safe drug consumption sites. Like that's something that could save lives because it's a place where people can take their drugs and do them on a site where there's safe equipment, clean needles, nurses on site to prevent overdoses. So things like that, measures like that are what we need to see start happening. And unfortunately, it's not happening quickly enough.
And why do you think that the United States still has this antiquated approach to drugs?
I mean, I think because of the war on drugs and, decades of essentially propaganda, anti-drug propaganda, police forces, I mean, the US has several sort of, DEA is one of them, these federal law enforcement agencies, they basically have a vested interest in perpetuating this war on drugs because it also justifies police budgets. We've seen how the war on drugs has specifically targeted Black people and led to mass incarceration. So there's a lot of bigger sort of socioeconomic and political factors at play.
Yeah, it definitely seems that, as we've seen from the initial stages of when drugs are essentially criminalized, that there is racism at play or some kind of socioeconomic issue at play. And I know that we're seeing these kind of things unfortunately play out abroad as well as locally. And it's my understanding that in 2021 so far, there's been an average of 172 people dying of opioids every month, which is a significant increase from 2020. What are we missing here? Why is this going on?
I mean, it's a tough question to answer. I think that, part of the issue is just this contaminated drug supply. This drug supply is heavily flooded with fentanyl. And the thing with opioids is, you build up a tolerance for them. So let's say you have fentanyl flooding New York City, then eventually the people who used heroin are going to get addicted to fentanyl, and heroin is no longer going to be sufficient for them. So they're going to then be seeking that drug. So it's one of those things where you can't really go back from it, or at least it's very difficult to do. And what scares me is right now, you're seeing this problem in the Midwest, in certain states in the East Coast. My hometown, Vancouver, Canada, there's no more heroin there anymore. I'm worried about kind of the more that this starts to happen in bigger markets and spreads, because it's kind of like there's no going back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And people are going to be hungry for something heavier, something, more potent and whatnot that could endanger their lives. And so I was wondering, we just hopefully coming off of a pandemic, and it seems that it put a lot of people under stress. I know I've had a lot of stress, from the changes economic, health-wise and whatnot. And so have you seen any changes in drug use because of COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, 2020 was the worst year on record in the US for fatal overdoses. There's 93,000 at least, and 2/3 of those were attributed to fentanyl. So I think that, it makes sense that you would see a spike in drug use, during a time of a lot of stress and hardship for people. But there's also other factors at play, such as using drugs alone. That's really dangerous. And I would say to people who use drugs to use with somebody else present, and use with naloxone present, which can reverse a fentanyl overdose. So we because of the whole stay at home and the COVID related measures, we've seen a lot more isolation as well. And so I think that's also led to an increase in overdoses.
And has anything changed in terms of the drug market itself when it comes to the business aspects of it? Because now that a lot of people still may be struggling with employment or whatnot, people usually turn to illicit means of being able to support themselves. So have we seen any change in that arena as well?
What do you mean by that? Do you mean are more people selling drugs now?
Yes, something similar to that.
I don't know. I don't really have the information, or I wouldn't be comfortable making a statement like that because I haven't necessarily seen that that's the case.
Yeah, and they probably don't do too much research on it because I would think people probably don't put drug dealer on their tax returns. But yeah, you never know. But we definitely know there have been some drug dealers out there with the opioid epidemic in terms of who's been held accountable. And right now there's a trial going on that is essentially somewhat of a seminal trial that is going after some of the providers, such as Walmart and other pharmacies that are allegedly being accused of being accountable in the opioid epidemic. And what have you seen in terms of conversations and whether accountability may be had?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I think, a lot of people say that the crisis did begin with prescription pills and sort of graduated from that. So yeah, I do think that, some of these big pharmaceutical companies absolutely should be held accountable. But at the same time, I just think that in a lot of cases, we've really moved on from that. Like it's gotten it's just gotten much farther away from those days years ago when it was about the pill mills. And now it's like you have to look at what's actually happening in the street supply of drugs.
Wow, yeah, that would be a very powerful thing. And I don't necessarily know how the government plans on addressing or attacking that, but I do know, and I feel confident about the fact that however it goes down, that you will definitely have it covered. And so where can you tell our viewers to find more information about your writing, research, and wonderful insight?
Just go to vice.com. I'm a Vice News reporter, so all my work is on the website.
Fantastic. Manisha Krishnan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.